can't let you leave, sir. There is danger ahead.
Move away from the car. I am warning you. I am late for work.
Will Anthony survive this horrific crash? What will his life become if he survives? Keep watching to find out. Gabriella's slippers slapped frantically against the cold marble floor as she burst through the kitchen door. Her red Maid uniform was barely fastened, her white cap askew, sweat already soaking through the fabric. "Mr. Anthony!" Her voice came out as a desperate shout. "Please stop! You cannot go to work today!" Anthony turned from his Maserati, his expression shifting from neutral to annoyed. He looked perfect as always. Navy blue suit fitted to perfection, crisp white shirt, burgundy tie, shoes polished to a mirror shine. The beautiful black Maserati gleamed in the early morning sunlight behind him like a deadly promise. His eyebrows drew together. His mouth formed a tight line. "Gabriella, what is this nonsense? I have an extremely important board meeting in 1 hour. Major investors are flying in from London. Please, sir, I'm begging you." She positioned herself directly in front of him, blocking his path to the car. Her chest heaved as she struggled to catch her breath. "Something terrible will happen if you leave today. Something awful. You have to stay home. Please, just this once, change your plans. Move aside." His voice dropped lower, harder, the tone he used in boardrooms when he wanted people to obey without question. "I don't have time for your superstitions." "It's not superstition." The words burst out of her, loud and desperate. Her hands trembled at her sides. "My dreams, they always come true. Every single time. I've never been wrong, not once." Her voice cracked with the weight of her fear. "I saw the accident, Mr. Anthony. I saw your car. I saw the crash. I saw—" She couldn't say the rest. Couldn't tell him she'd seen him dead. "Please, sir, please just trust me. Just stay home today." A dream? He stared at her as if she had completely lost her mind. His face showed disbelief mixed with irritation. "You're actually standing here, blocking my path, making me late for one of the most important meetings of my career, because of a dream?" He shook his head and tried to step around her. "I expected better from you, Gabriella. My wife was right to have concerns when we hired you. She said you seemed odd, too quiet, too intense. Perhaps I made a mistake bringing you into this household." The words hit her like physical blows. Each one landed hard in her chest, knocking the breath from her lungs. For 6 long months, Gabriella had worked harder than she'd ever worked in her entire life. She had been perfect, or as close to perfect as humanly possible. She never complained, never gossiped, never took a single thing that didn't belong to her. She had watched other maids come and go from the Okonkwo household, fired for the smallest infractions. The standards were impossibly high, and Mrs. Natasha's temper was legendary among the household staff in the neighborhood. Gabriella had been so careful, so dedicated, so determined to prove herself worthy. And now, trying to save his life, she was being told she was a mistake. That she was odd. That hiring her had been an error in judgment. "Sir, please, just listen." But he was already walking past her, his shoulder brushing against hers as he moved around her. She watched helplessly as he strode to the Maserati. He opened the driver's side door with smooth, practiced ease. He tossed his briefcase onto the passenger seat. He settled into the leather interior and pulled the door shut with a solid, final-sounding thunk. The engine roared to life, loud and powerful, a sound that usually meant success and luxury. Today it sounded like a death knell. Through the tinted window, Gabriella could see him gripping the steering wheel. His jaw was tight with anger. His eyes stared straight ahead, refusing to look at her. Then his foot pressed down on the accelerator. The Maserati shot forward like a bullet, tires squealing slightly on the smooth driveway. It reached the gate, which opened automatically at its approach. The car didn't even slow down. It flew through the opening and disappeared down the tree-lined road, moving far too fast. Gabriella stood frozen in the middle of the driveway. Her arms hung limply at her sides. Her whole body trembled, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The morning air that had felt cool before now felt freezing against her sweat-soaked skin. She had failed him, completely and utterly failed. As Gabriella stood trembling in the driveway, the nightmare flashed back through her mind with sickening clarity. The screech of tires, the smell of burning rubber, The Maserati spinning out of control on the highway, tires unable to grip the slick road, twisted metal, shattered glass glittering across the highway like deadly diamonds. And Anthony's face, pale, still, his eyes open but seeing nothing. Dead. But she knew. God help her, she knew. Because her visions always came true, always. When she was 12, she'd dreamed of her uncle drowning, thrashing in dark water, arms reaching for a surface he'd never reach. 3 days later, his boat capsized in a storm. They found his body tangled in his own fishing nets. At 17, she'd seen flames consuming Mrs. Adeyemi's house, heard the crackling, smelled the smoke, watched her elderly neighbour stumbling through burning rooms. 7 days later, a candle fell. The house burned to the ground. Every vision, every warning, every time she tried to stop it. No one ever believed her until it was too late. That's why she'd thrown on her uniform in a panic. Why she'd run down the stairs, her heart hammering. Why she'd burst through that door, desperate, pleading, begging him to listen. But he hadn't listened. Just like her uncle Howard. Just like Mrs. Adeyemi. Just like everyone else who thought she was crazy, superstitious, odd, the vision would come true. It always did. Gabriella's legs finally gave out. She collapsed onto the driveway, her red uniform stark against the pale marble. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the empty road where the Maserati had disappeared. Somewhere out there, right now, Anthony was driving his death. And there was nothing she could do but wait for the phone call that would confirm what she already knew. The premonition had come true. Again. Anthony's hands gripped the leather steering wheel as he merged onto the Lagos Expressway. Traffic was already building, even at this early hour. Cars and trucks jostled for position, everyone in a hurry to get somewhere, everyone convinced their destination was more important than anyone else's. He was still annoyed about Gabriella's strange behavior. The scene kept replaying in his mind, her desperate face, her trembling body, the genuine terror in her eyes. She had looked absolutely convinced that something terrible was going to happen to him. Why had she been so frightened? It wasn't like her at all. In 6 months of working in his household, Gabriella had always been quiet, composed, professional. She never caused drama or made scenes. That was why he'd fought Natasha to keep her on staff when his wife had complained about her being too intense, too strange. But dreams, premonitions, visions of the future, that was complete nonsense. He was a businessman, trained in logic and reason. He dealt with facts, numbers, spreadsheets, contracts, not superstitions about predicting the future. That was village talk, old wives' tales, the kind of thing his educated modern mind rejected automatically. Still, something about her desperation bothered him. It nagged at the back of his mind like a splinter he couldn't quite pull out. His thoughts drifted to Natasha, and his mood darkened further. When had everything gone so wrong between them? He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when his marriage had started dying, but he knew it was dying. Slowly, painfully, like watching someone fade away from a disease you couldn't cure. In the beginning, the beginning felt like a lifetime ago now, she had been different, so different. Warm and affectionate, always touching his arm, holding his hand, kissing his cheek. She used to laugh at his jokes, even the terrible ones. They would stay up until 3 a.m, talking about everything and nothing, their dreams, their fears, their plans for the future they would build together. They were going to have 3 children, a boy first, then 2 girls. They would raise them with values, with education, with love. They would travel the world as a family, grow old together surrounded by grandchildren. Now Natasha felt like a ghost haunting his house. She was there physically. He could see her, touch her, hear her voice, but the woman he had married was gone. The warmth had vanished, replaced by cold indifference. She barely looked at him anymore. When she did, her eyes were empty, distant, as if she was looking at a stranger she had no interest in knowing. He had tried everything to bring her back. Expensive gifts, diamond earrings, designer handbags, a new Mercedes, surprise vacations to Paris, Dubai, the Maldives, romantic dinners at the finest restaurants in Lagos with champagne and candlelight and violinists playing at their table. Nothing worked. Nothing even came close. The gifts she accepted with a polite thank you before setting them aside. The vacations she spent on her phone, taking selfies for Instagram but barely speaking to him. The romantic dinners she endured with obvious boredom, checking her watch every few minutes. Her love was slipping through his fingers like water, and no matter how tightly he tried to hold on, he couldn't stop it from draining away. Lost in these dark, painful thoughts, Anthony didn't see the danger ahead until it was too late. A massive patch of oil covered 2 lanes of the highway, slick and shiny in the morning sun. Some truck must have leaked it, or maybe there'd been an accident earlier. Whatever the cause, it was there, waiting like a trap. By the time Anthony's brain registered what his eyes were seeing, his tires had already hit the oil. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment he had complete control of the vehicle, the next moment he had none. The Maserati began to slide sideways, tires completely unable to grip the road. It was like driving on ice, or soap, or nothing at all. Anthony's heart jumped into his throat. His training kicked in. Don't slam the brakes, don't overcorrect, try to steer gently into the slide. But the car wouldn't respond. The steering wheel turned uselessly in his hands. The vehicle had become a 2-ton missile with no guidance system. Horns blared all around him, a cacophony of panic. Other drivers saw him sliding and tried to get out of the way. Tires screamed against pavement, the sound like animals dying. The Maserati spun completely around once, twice, the world outside the windows becoming a blur of color and motion. Then it slammed sideways into the concrete barrier dividing the highway lanes. The impact was like a bomb going off. The sound was deafening, metal crunching, glass exploding, airbags deploying with violent force. Anthony's body jerked hard against the seatbelt, which cut into his chest and shoulder. Sharp, blinding pain shot up his spine, so intense it made his vision go white. Then everything went black. The smell hit him first when consciousness slowly returned. That sharp, chemical hospital smell that gets into your nose and your throat and your lungs and won't leave. Antiseptic and suffering mixed together. Anthony's eyes opened slowly, painfully. Everything was blurry at first, like looking through frosted glass. Gradually, shapes became clearer. White ceiling tiles, fluorescent lights, medical equipment beeping steadily beside him. Then he saw her. Natasha sat in a chair beside his hospital bed. She was dressed perfectly, as always. Designer blouse, tailored pants, expensive jewelry catching the light. Her makeup was flawless, not a hair out of place. Her large designer sunglasses were pushed up on top of her head like a fashion accessory, even though they were indoors. She was crying, loudly, dramatically. Her shoulders shook with sobs. She dabbed at her eyes with a delicate tissue, careful not to smudge her mascara. "My husband, oh God! My poor husband!" she wailed, her voice carrying through the room and probably down the hallway. "This is terrible, so terrible." Other people were in the room, doctors in white coats, nurses moving efficiently, maybe a few family friends standing awkwardly in the corner. They all looked at Natasha with sympathy and compassion. Poor woman, their faces said. Look how devastated she is. Look how much she loves her husband. But Anthony could see what they couldn't. He'd been married to her for 5 years. He knew her tells, her tricks, the small signs that gave her away. Her tears weren't reaching her eyes. Her grief was a performance, and not even a particularly good one. She was crying because that's what wives were supposed to do in hospitals. She was playing the role she thought people expected. Her tears weren't real. Then the doctors approached his bed. 3 of them, led by a tall man with kind eyes and greying hair. Dr. Okafor, his name tag read, Senior Consultant, Orthopedic Surgery. They explained everything in careful, measured tones. The technical language, then the translation into words he could understand. Severe spinal cord injury, multiple fractured vertebrae in the lumbar region. Emergency surgery had been performed immediately to stabilize the spine and prevent further damage. The surgery had been successful in saving his life, but the damage to his spinal cord was extensive, permanent. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Okonkwo," Dr. Okafor said quietly, compassionately. "The injury is complete at the L1 level. You will retain function of your upper body and arms, but your legs..." He paused, letting Anthony process what was coming. "You won't regain function in your lower limbs. We'll provide physical therapy, of course, and you'll learn to adapt. Many people live full, productive lives in wheelchairs. But you need to understand, you will never walk again." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Never walk again. Never stand. Never run. Never climb stairs. Never dance. Never play football with the sons he dreamed of having. Never walk his future daughters down the aisle at their weddings. Never. Such a small word to carry such enormous weight. Anthony's eyes moved to Natasha's face. He watched her carefully, studying her reaction to this life-changing news. Her loud, dramatic crying stopped. Just like that. The tears dried up instantly, as if someone had turned off a faucet. Her face went completely blank, empty of all expression. Then something entered her eyes, something cold and calculating. She stared at him from her chair as if she was seeing him for the first time, or as if she was looking at a stranger she had no interest in knowing. She said nothing, not one word of comfort. Not one promise that they would face this together. Not even a simple, "I'm sorry." Just that cold, appraising stare, as if she was mentally calculating what his paralysis meant for her life, her plans, her future. Anthony felt something crack inside his chest. It wasn't physical pain, the medications were handling that. This was deeper. This was the sound of hope dying. 6 weeks crawled by like 6 years. Surgery after surgery, each one trying to repair damage that couldn't truly be repaired. Physical therapy sessions where therapists with determinedly cheerful faces tried to teach him exercises that went nowhere, accomplished nothing. Pain that came in waves, sometimes dull and manageable, sometimes sharp and breathtaking, but never completely gone. Natasha visited exactly twice during those 6 weeks. The first time, she stayed for 20 minutes, spent most of it on her phone, and left without kissing him goodbye. The second time, she didn't even sit down. She stood by the door, announced she'd hired a new decorator for the guest bedroom, and left. Finally, the doctors said he could go home. Anthony should have felt relief. Instead, he felt dread. Natasha drove him home in complete oppressive silence. She didn't ask how he felt, didn't ask if he was comfortable, didn't ask if the wheelchair was positioned properly, or if the seatbelt was too tight, or if he needed to stop for any reason. She drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead, jaw set, as if she was driving a delivery she didn't want to make. The entire 30-minute drive passed without a single word spoken between them. When they arrived at the house, she didn't help him out of the car. She didn't even turn off the engine. She just put it in park and sat there, waiting. 2 hospital attendants who'd followed in a medical transport van had to carry Anthony out of the passenger seat like a child, then lift him into the wheelchair. The humiliation burned worse than any physical pain. His face felt hot with shame as they wheeled him through his own front door like a piece of furniture being delivered. "Gabriella!" Natasha's voice cracked through the house like a whip, sharp and commanding. "Get in here, right now!" Footsteps came quickly from the kitchen. Gabriella appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. The moment her eyes landed on Anthony in the wheelchair, her face crumpled. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes instantly and spilled down her cheeks in streams. "He's your responsibility now," Natasha said flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. She was already turning away, already heading for the stairs. "Feed him, bathe him, dress him, whatever he needs. I have things to do." Important things. "Madam, please." Gabriella started, her voice thick with tears and shock. But Natasha wasn't listening. She climbed the stairs without looking back, her heels clicking against the marble with sharp final sounds. At the top of the stairs, she turned left instead of right. Not toward the master bedroom she'd shared with Anthony for 5 years, toward the guest bedroom at the far end of the hall. The sound of that door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. Final. Absolute. The sound of a marriage ending. Gabriella knelt down beside the wheelchair, bringing herself to Anthony's eye level. Tears still streamed down her face. "Mr. Anthony," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have tried harder to stop you. I should have found a way to make you listen. I should have. You warned me." Anthony's voice came out rough and broken, unused for too long. "You tried everything you could. I didn't listen. I was arrogant and stupid, and I didn't listen." He met her eyes, saw the guilt eating her alive. "This is not your fault, Gabriella. Do you hear me? This is not on you." But the guilt in her eyes didn't fade. She blamed herself completely. He could see it written across her face as clearly as words on a page. And Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that they were both trapped now, trapped in a nightmare that had no end, no exit, no hope of waking up. The weeks that followed established a new routine. one that felt like a punishment designed specifically for Anthony's pride. Every morning at 6, Gabriella would knock softly on his bedroom door. She would help him sit up, swing his lifeless legs over the side of the bed, transfer him to the wheelchair. Then came the bathroom, the most humiliating part of his day. She would help him with everything, always keeping her eyes downcast, trying to preserve whatever dignity he had left. But dignity was hard to hold on to when another person had to help you with the most basic human functions. She would bathe him, running a warm washcloth over skin that could no longer feel her touch below the waist. She would dress him, buttoning shirts, pulling on pants over legs that hung like dead weight. She would comb his hair, prepare his breakfast, cut his food into smaller pieces when his hands shook too much from exhaustion or frustration. Through it all, Gabriella never complained, never showed disgust or impatience. She moved with quiet efficiency, her face calm and kind. When Anthony snapped at her, which happened often in those early days, his anger at his situation spilling onto the nearest target, she simply absorbed it like rain on stone, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. "I'm sorry," he would say afterward, ashamed of his outbursts. "You don't need to apologize, Mr. Anthony," she would reply softly. "I understand." And somehow she did understand. That was the strangest part. She seemed to know exactly when he needed help and when he needed to struggle on his own, when he needed conversation and when he needed silence, when he needed encouragement and when he needed someone to just sit with him in his grief. Natasha, meanwhile, became a ghost in her own home. She would emerge from the guest bedroom around 10 in the morning, always perfectly dressed, makeup flawless, not a hair out of place. Designer workout clothes that probably cost more than Gabriella made in a month hugged her body like a second skin. She would grab her designer gym bag and her car keys without a word to anyone. "Where are you going?" Anthony asked once, in those early days when he still hoped things might get better. "Out," was all she said. She would return hours later, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes not until evening, sometimes not until the next morning. When she was home, she stayed in the guest bedroom with the door locked, the sound of her laughter at whoever she was talking to on the phone drifting through the house like poison. She never asked Anthony how he was feeling, never joined him for meals, never even looked directly at him if she could avoid it. When she had to pass him in the hallway, she would turn her face away, as if the sight of him in his wheelchair physically pained her, or disgusted her. Then, 2 months after the accident, Alex arrived. Natasha announced it at breakfast one morning, one of the rare times she bothered to come to the dining room. "I've hired a personal trainer," she said, not to Anthony, but to her phone screen as she scrolled through Instagram. "He'll be coming to the house 3 times a week. We'll be using the home gym." Anthony looked up from the newspaper Gabriella had been reading to him. "A trainer? Why do you need?" "I need to maintain my figure," Natasha cut him off sharply. "Just because you've given up on your body doesn't mean I have to let mine go." The words landed like a slap. Anthony's face burned with shame. Gabriella's hand tightened on the edge of the newspaper, but she said nothing. Alex showed up the next day. He was everything Anthony was not. Tall, muscular, with the kind of body that came from spending hours in the gym every day. Probably in his late 20s, with perfect white teeth and the kind of smile that looked friendly but felt predatory. He wore tight athletic clothes that showed off every muscle, and he walked with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how attractive he was. "Mrs. Okonkwo," he said, taking Natasha's hand and holding it just a moment too long. "It's a pleasure to meet you. We're going to get you in amazing shape." Natasha giggled, actually giggled like a schoolgirl with a crush. "Please, call me Natasha." From his position in the living room, Anthony watched them through the open doorway, watched as Alex's hand moved to Natasha's lower back to guide her toward the gym, watched as she leaned into his touch, smiling up at him with a warmth she hadn't shown Anthony in over a year. Something cold settled in his stomach. The workouts became regular. Every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 2 in the afternoon. Anthony could hear them from wherever he was in the house. Natasha's laughter, Alex's deep voice encouraging her, the sound of weights clanking, music playing. But it was what he saw that destroyed him. One afternoon, Anthony wheeled himself toward the kitchen for water. The home gym was on the way, the door partially open. He couldn't help but glance inside. Alex stood behind Natasha as she did squats, his hands on her hips, his body pressed against her back. But his hands weren't just correcting her form. They were caressing her, moving slowly, deliberately, intimately. And Natasha wasn't pulling away. She was leaning back into him, her eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. Anthony's hands gripped the wheelchair so hard his knuckles went white. He sat there, frozen, unable to move, unable to look away, unable to process what he was seeing. Then Alex's lips brushed against Natasha's neck. She tilted her head to give him better access. His hands slid up from her hips to her waist, then higher. "Did you see that?" Anthony asked Gabriella later that day. His voice came out as barely a whisper. They were in his study, where Gabriella had been helping him review company documents. "Tell me I imagined it, please." Gabriella's face was full of pity. She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. After that day, Anthony began to notice more. The workouts that lasted 3 hours instead of 1. The way Natasha and Alex would disappear upstairs after exercising, the way they would emerge an hour later, Natasha's face flushed, her hair messed, Alex's shirt buttoned wrong. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The affair was happening right under his roof, in his own home, sometimes while he sat downstairs completely helpless to do anything about it. The humiliation was complete. 6 months after the accident, Natasha swept into Anthony's study where Gabriella was helping him review quarterly financial reports. Natasha looked radiant, glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from being thoroughly desired. She wore a tight red dress that left little to the imagination. "I want a divorce," she announced. No preamble, no pretense of regret. Just cold, simple fact. Anthony's pen stopped moving. He'd known this moment was coming, had felt it approaching like dark clouds before a storm, but hearing the words still felt like having something vital carved out of his chest with a rusty knife. "Fine," he said quietly, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Take whatever you want. Just go." "Oh, I intend to." Her smile was sharp, cruel. "My lawyer will be in touch." Natasha's lawyer was ruthless, efficient, and absolutely merciless. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. She wanted out, and she wanted her share of everything Anthony had built. By the time the paperwork was finalized 6 weeks later, she'd walked away with half of all liquid assets, the vacation home in Cape Town, a luxury car, and a settlement that would keep her comfortable for years. Within a week of the divorce being final, Natasha moved Alex into a penthouse apartment in Victoria Island, one of the most expensive areas in Lagos. The place had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, a rooftop pool, and monthly rent that could feed a family for a year. Their new life became a carousel of champagne, nightclubs, expensive restaurants, and beach parties. Natasha documented everything on Instagram. Photos of her in designer bikinis, videos of her and Alex dancing at exclusive clubs, selfies of them kissing in front of luxury cars. Each post seemed designed specifically to show Anthony what he'd lost, what he could never have again. The captions were worse than the photos. "Living my best life. Finally free. Real love feels like this." Each one was a knife twisted in the wound. Anthony stopped looking at social media after the first week. But people made sure to tell him anyway. Well-meaning friends who thought he should know, business associates who'd seen the posts, even his own mother who called in tears asking what had happened to his marriage. Meanwhile, Anthony threw himself into his work with the desperation of a drowning man clawing toward air. If he couldn't control his body, couldn't control his marriage, couldn't control anything about his personal life, at least he could control his business. He worked 16-hour days. He strategized, innovated, built new partnerships. He made bold moves his competitors didn't see coming. The company had suffered during his recovery, but his mind, thank God, his mind was still sharp, still brilliant, still capable of building empires. And through every late night, every breakthrough, every setback, Gabriella was there. She would bring him coffee at midnight when his eyes started to close. She would read contracts aloud when his vision blurred from staring at screens too long. She would offer insights on deals that surprised him with their intelligence. She was smarter than she let on, he realized. She understood business, understood people, understood nuances that many of his paid executives missed. "You should be doing more than this," he told her one night around 3 in the morning. They were preparing a presentation for international investors. "You're wasting your talents cleaning houses." She smiled softly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The months blurred together. The company expanded into new markets. Anthony's wheelchair became less of a prison and more of a throne, from which he commanded an empire that now spanned 3 continents. His bank accounts grew. His reputation rebuilt itself, stronger than before. And somewhere in the chaos of late nights and shared victories, Anthony realized something that should have terrified him, but instead felt like the first warm thing he'd experienced in years. The woman who brought him coffee, who laughed at his terrible jokes, who stayed up until dawn helping him prepare presentations, who celebrated his victories and mourned his losses, she'd become essential in ways that had nothing to do with her job. She'd become his partner, his confidant, his friend, and maybe, just maybe, something more. One evening, as Gabriella was preparing to leave his study, he caught her hand. Her skin was warm against his palm. "Stay," he said softly. "Just a few more minutes, please." She sat down in the chair across from him, and they talked through the night. They talked about dreams that never happened, and the chance to try again, about pain that fades and gratitude that grows, about how something as unlikely as a boss and an employee, or tragedy and survival, can turn into something that feels a lot like hope, like family, like home. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as Gabriella was serving dinner. Anthony's phone rang with an international number. Mumbai, India. "Mr. Okonkwo, this is Dr. Rajesh Patel from the Advanced Spinal Institute." The voice was warm, professional, carrying a hint of excitement. "I've been following your case through your medical records. I believe I may be able to help you." Anthony's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Help me how?" "We've developed a new reconstructive procedure," Dr. Patel explained. "It combines stem cell therapy with advanced microsurgery to repair spinal cord damage. It's still experimental, but we've had 3 successful cases in the past 18 months. Patients who were told they'd never walk again are now mobile." Anthony's heart began to pound. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying there's a chance. Not a guarantee, but a real, genuine chance that you could walk again. Your injury profile makes you an excellent candidate. The damage is localized, your overall health is good, and you're young enough that your body should respond well to treatment." Anthony looked up at Gabriella, who'd frozen in place, a water pitcher in her hand. Her eyes were wide, hopeful, afraid to hope. "What are the risks?" Anthony asked, his businessman's brain kicking in even as his heart raced. "Significant," Dr. Patel said honestly. "The surgery is complex, lengthy. There's risk of infection, complications, even increased paralysis. But in my professional opinion, the potential benefit outweighs the risk. I wouldn't have called if I didn't believe that." "How soon can we do this?" "I have an opening in 3 weeks. I'll understand if you want time to think about it, to research the procedure." "Book it," Anthony said immediately. "We're coming." Gabriella's hand flew to her mouth. Tears instantly filled her eyes. "We?" Dr. Patel asked. Anthony looked at Gabriella. "Yes, we." The flight to Mumbai was long, over 8 hours, but Anthony barely noticed. He spent the time reading everything Dr. Patel had sent him about the procedure, studying success rates, understanding what he was about to undergo. Gabriella sat beside him, sometimes reading over his shoulder, sometimes just watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or fear. Or something deeper that neither of them was ready to put into words. The hospital was state-of-the-art, all glass and steel and the latest medical technology. Dr. Patel met them personally, a slight man in his 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. "The surgery will take approximately 14 hours, he explained in his office. "We'll be working with microscopic instruments to repair nerve damage and stimulate regeneration. It's delicate work, precision work." "When?" Anthony asked. "Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. That night, in the hotel room adjacent to Anthony's, Gabriella couldn't sleep. She paced the floor, praying every prayer she knew and inventing new ones. She thought about her gift, her curse, that had shown her Anthony's accident, but hadn't shown her this. What did that mean? Was this surgery not meant to happen? Or was the future changing, rewriting itself? At 5 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went to Anthony's room. She found him already awake, staring out the window at the Mumbai skyline, beginning to lighten with dawn. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too nervous." He held out his hand. She took it, and they sat together in silence until the nurses came to take him to surgery. "I'll be right here," Gabriella promised as they wheeled him away. "I'm not going anywhere." The last thing Anthony saw before the anesthesia took him was her face, brave and determined, even as tears ran down her cheeks. 14 hours. Gabriella paced the hospital corridors until her feet ached. She sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs until her back screamed. She drank terrible coffee from vending machines and barely touched the food well-meaning nurses brought her. She prayed until she ran out of words, then started over from the beginning. Other families came and went. Surgeries ended, patients were wheeled to recovery rooms. But the light above Anthony's operating room stayed red, still in surgery, still fighting, hour 7, hour 10, hour 12. Gabriella's prayers became desperate, incoherent. Please, please, please let him be okay. I can't lose him. Not now, not after everything. Finally, after what felt like several lifetimes compressed into one endless day, the light turned green. Dr. Patel emerged 30 minutes later, still in his surgical scrubs. His face was exhausted but smiling. Actually smiling. Gabriella leaped to her feet. "How is he?" "The surgery went better than I could have hoped," Dr. Patel said, and Gabriella's legs almost gave out with relief. "We were able to repair more damage than anticipated. The nerve regeneration looks promising. Of course, the real test will be the recovery period, but I'm cautiously optimistic." "Can I see him?" "Once he's moved to recovery and wakes from anesthesia, a few more hours." Gabriella collapsed into her chair and finally let herself weep with relief. The recovery was brutal. Anthony had thought physical therapy in Lagos after the accident was hard. That was nothing compared to this. Dr. Patel's team pushed him to his absolute limits and then demanded more. Every day, hours of exercises that left him drenched in sweat and shaking with exhaustion. Movements that seemed impossible, flexing toes, bending knees, putting weight on legs that had forgotten how to hold him up. There were setbacks. Days when nothing worked, when his legs remained stubbornly lifeless, no matter how hard he tried. Days when the pain was so intense he couldn't think straight. Days when he wanted to give up, to accept that maybe this miracle wasn't meant for him. But Gabriella was there. Every morning at 6, she'd be in the therapy room before him, coffee in hand and determination on her face. When his legs trembled and threatened to give out, she was there to catch him. When he fell, and he fell often, she helped him up. When frustration made him want to quit, she refused to let him. "Again," she'd say firmly, "you can do this. I know you can." "I can't." Again. And somehow, impossibly, things began to change. Tiny improvements that felt like miracles. Toes that wiggled on command. Legs that could hold his weight for 5 seconds, then 10, then 30. Steps taken with support, then with less support, then with just a cane. 3 months in Mumbai. 3 months of pain and sweat and stubbornness. 3 months of Gabriella beside him every single day, believing in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And then, on a Wednesday morning in the therapy room, something shifted. Anthony stood with the parallel bars on either side of him, as he had 1,000 times before. Dr. Patel and 2 therapists stood nearby, ready to catch him if he fell. Gabriella stood at the end of the bars, 20 feet away, her hands clasped together like she was praying. "Try without the bars," Dr. Patel said quietly. Anthony's heart pounded. He'd taken steps with support, but standing completely free, balancing on legs that had been dead for so long, that was different. That was terrifying. "You can do this," Gabriella called softly. Anthony took a deep breath. He let go of the bars. For a moment he wobbled. His legs shook. Every muscle in his body tensed with the effort of staying upright. Then he took a step, 1 foot in front of the other, just like he'd done thousands of times before the accident, like walking was the most natural thing in the world. Another step. His legs trembled but held. Another. Then another. The therapy room had gone completely silent. Even the other patients stopped their exercises to watch. Anthony walked, slowly, carefully, but he walked. 5 steps, 10, 15. All the way to where Gabriella stood, tears streaming down her face, her hands now covering her mouth. When he reached her, his legs finally gave out. But Gabriella caught him. her arms wrapped around him, holding him up, holding him close. And suddenly Anthony was holding her too, his arms tight around her waist, his face buried in her shoulder. They stood there in the middle of the therapy room, clinging to each other as if they could will away every moment of pain, every hour of doubt, every day of impossible effort that had led them to this miracle. "Thank you," Anthony whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "Thank you for everything, for staying, for believing, for not giving up on me when I was ready to give up on myself." "I see you," Gabriella whispered back, and Anthony realized she was trembling. "I always saw you. Nothing, not the wheelchair, not the paralysis, not any of it. Nothing could ever make me see you as less than who you really are." They pulled back just enough to look at each other. Gabriella's face was wet with tears, her eyes shining with joy and something else. Something deeper, warmer, more complicated. Anthony's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. The moment stretched between them, full of everything they hadn't said, everything they'd been too afraid to name. Then someone in the therapy room started clapping. Then another person. Then everyone. Patients, therapists, doctors, even the cleaning staff who'd been watching from the doorway. Everyone erupted in applause. But Anthony and Gabriella barely heard them. They stood wrapped in each other's arms, two people who'd walked through fire together and emerged on the other side, transformed into something neither of them fully understood yet. But something that felt a lot like coming home. Natasha woke up to 17 notifications on her phone, all from her bank. She blinked at the screen, still half asleep, certain there must be some mistake. Account alert, insufficient funds, transaction declined, current balance $847.23, overdraft protection activated. Her heart stopped. She sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. This had to be wrong. There should be hundreds of thousands in that account. The divorce settlement, her savings, everything. She opened her banking app with shaking hands. The number that appeared made her stomach drop like a stone. $847. That was all that remained of the fortune she'd walked away with less than a year ago. All of it gone. Spent on designer clothes that now hung unworn in her closet. Bottles of champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. First-class tickets to destinations she barely remembered. Penthouse rent that ate through money like fire through paper. Dinners at exclusive restaurants. Shopping sprees in Paris and Dubai. Living like a queen without thinking about tomorrow. And Alex. So much money spent on Alex. The Rolex watch he'd wanted. The custom suits, the sports car he'd insisted he needed, the investment in his personal training business that never seemed to materialize. "Alex," she called out, panic rising in her throat like bile. "Alex, we need to talk." Silence. She climbed out of bed and searched the penthouse. His clothes were gone from the closet, his toiletries missing from the bathroom, his laptop, his gym bag, his expensive sneakers, all vanished. On the kitchen counter she found his phone, the one she'd bought him. Sitting next to it was a note scrawled on the back of a takeout receipt. It was fun while it lasted. Good luck. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just 7 words and a disconnected phone number. Alex had disappeared the moment the money ran out, like smoke in the wind. Natasha sank onto the expensive leather couch she could no longer afford and felt something crack inside her chest. She was 34 years old, with no job, no skills except spending money that was no longer there, and no prospects except the growing stack of unpaid bills on her counter. She sat surrounded by all the things she'd bought, designer furniture, expensive art, closets full of clothes with tags still attached, and realized none of it meant anything. None of it could hold her when she cried. None of it would stay when things got hard. She'd traded a man who loved her for a man who loved her money, and now both were gone. But Anthony had always been soft-hearted, hadn't he? Sentimental and forgiving. She just needed to show up, cry a little, admit she'd made a terrible mistake. He'd take her back. He had to. He'd loved her once. Surely some of that love remained. She had no other options. Natasha drove to the house in Victoria Island. Their house, she still thought of it, though she'd abandoned it without looking back. She'd dressed carefully for this moment. A simple dress, not too expensive looking, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, the image of a woman who'd learned her lesson, who was ready to come home. The security guard's eyes widened when he recognized her. For a moment, she thought he might not let her in. Then, wordlessly, he opened the gate. Her hands trembled as she walked up the driveway. She'd rehearsed what she would say 100 times during the drive. I was scared, confused. I wasn't thinking clearly. But I never stopped loving you, Anthony. I was just lost, and I need you to help me find my way back. Please forgive me. She rang the doorbell and waited, arranging her face into an expression of humble contrition. The door swung open. Every word Natasha had prepared died on her lips. Gabriella stood in the doorway, but this wasn't the quiet, plain maid Natasha remembered. This woman was radiant, glowing, beautiful in a simple yellow dress that couldn't hide the unmistakable swell of her pregnant belly. 6 months along, maybe 7, pregnant. Before Natasha could process this, movement on the stairs caught her eye. She looked up and her world tilted completely off its axis. Anthony was walking down the stairs, actually walking. No wheelchair, no cane, just walking with easy confidence, wearing nothing but grey sweatpants that hung low on his hips, his chest bare, a coffee mug in his hand. He looked healthy, strong, alive in ways she hadn't seen in years. He reached the door and his hand came to rest on Gabriella's shoulder, possessive, protective, intimate. A gesture that spoke of countless shared moments, of a bond forged through fire. Natasha. His voice was neither warm nor cold, simply stating a fact. Can we help you? We. The word hit her like a physical blow. Natasha's mouth opened and closed. She looked from the man she'd abandoned in his wheelchair to the woman she'd dismissed as nothing more than hired help. They stood together in the doorway, not just standing near each other, but clearly together. Two people who'd walked through hell and emerged fused into something unbreakable. Natasha's voice cracked. Her carefully rehearsed speech evaporated like morning dew. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I want to come home. Gabriella's hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective. Anthony's expression didn't change. This isn't your home anymore, he said quietly, firmly. It hasn't been for a long time. Anthony, please. Desperation crept into her voice. I was wrong, about everything. I see that now. I was stupid and shallow and I threw away something precious. But we had 5 years together. That has to mean something. We can start over. We can start over? For the first time, emotion entered Anthony's voice. Not anger. Something sadder, like pity. Natasha, you didn't just leave me. You left me when I needed you most. You made me feel like I was worthless because I couldn't walk. You brought your lover into our home and flaunted your affair while I sat helpless downstairs. You took half of everything I'd built and walked away without looking back. I know, and I'm sorry. And through all of that, Anthony continued, his voice growing stronger, Gabriella stayed. She stayed when staying was hard. When there was no money in it, no glory, no Instagram posts to show off. She stayed because that's who she is. Because she sees people, really sees them, not just what they can do for her. His hand tightened on Gabriella's shoulder. She looked up at him, and the love in her eyes was so clear, so pure, it made Natasha's chest ache. I hope you find what you're looking for, Natasha, Anthony said, and she heard the finality in his voice. I hope you find happiness. I genuinely do. But you won't find it here. Not anymore. That door closed a long time ago. Please. But she was talking to a closing door. It shut softly, gently, without anger. Just closed with quiet finality, the sound of one chapter ending and another beginning. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, Natasha could see 2 silhouettes merging into one. Anthony pulling Gabriella close, his hand resting on the curve where their child grew. Gabriella's arms wrapping around his waist. 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of catastrophe and built something beautiful from the ruins. Natasha stood on the doorstep of the life she'd thrown away like trash, the house she'd abandoned, the man she'd dismissed as broken. The future she'd traded for champagne and Instagram likes and a personal trainer who'd disappeared the moment the money ran out. She stood there as the sun set behind her, casting long shadows across the driveway, and for the first time in her life, she truly understood what she'd lost. Not the house, or the money, or the lifestyle. She'd lost a man who would have loved her through anything, who would have built her a life of meaning and depth and genuine connection, who would have given her everything she actually needed, if only she'd been wise enough to see it. She'd lost her home, Her family, her chance at real happiness. And she'd lost it for nothing.